The sand tasted like metal and old sweat. I know that because my face was pressed into it, and I was trying very hard not to let anyone see that my right arm was shaking. The crowd above me was not human. The sounds they made were not cheers. Not exactly. It was more like a low, vibrating hum that filled the entire arena from floor to ceiling, and it pressed against my ears like water pressure at the bottom of a lake. 40,000 aliens watching a man from Earth try to survive the next 30 seconds. My name is Marcus Vale. I was 29 years old when they took me. I am 33 now, 4 years on this planet, and the thing I had learned most clearly, the thing that kept me alive when smarter plans failed, was this. Never let them see the shake in your arm. I pushed myself up from the sand. The creature across the arena from me was called a Veldrun. I had heard the handlers talk about it for 3 days before the fight. They spoke about it the way people back home talked about tornadoes, with a mixture of fear and excitement, and the unspoken belief that it would not happen to them personally. The Veldrun stood on 6 legs, each one thick as a tree trunk, and its hide was layered like overlapping plates of dark stone. It had no eyes that I could see. It found things through vibration. Every footstep I took was a signal to it. Every breath. I had already broken 2 of my fingers on that hide. I had learned that the hard way, about 40 seconds into the fight, when I tried to drive my fist into its side and felt the bones bend the wrong way. The pain was enormous. I filed it away in a part of my brain that I kept specifically for things I would deal with later, and I kept moving. The Veldrun turned toward me, not because it saw me, because I had just exhaled. Here is what they did not understand. Any of them. Not the handlers, not the arena owners, not the 40,000 humming aliens in the stands. They had put me in this arena because I was a human, and to them, a human was a novelty. A primitive creature from a young, unimportant planet. We had only reached faster than light travel 40 years ago. In galactic terms, that made us newborns. Every other species in the Kethvaran interstellar compact had been traveling the stars for centuries, some for thousands of years. They had been building empires while we were still drawing maps of our own oceans. So when the compact's ships arrived near Earth 40 years ago, they did not announce themselves as neighbors. They announced themselves as collectors. They had a long history of cataloging young species, studying them, and where they found something interesting, taking samples. In the early years, the samples were biological. Later, they discovered that young species made excellent entertainment. Humans, they found, were particularly entertaining. Not because we were the strongest, not because we were the fastest. We were neither. Most alien species in the compact were physically superior to us, in ways that would take me an hour to list. What made humans interesting was something the arena owners had not fully calculated when they started buying us from the collectors. We were impossible to predict. I was thinking about all of this while the Veldrun charged me. It moved fast for something that big, faster than anything had a right to move on 6 legs, and the ground shook with each strike. The crowd's hum rose in pitch. I ran. Not away, not exactly. I ran at an angle, toward the left wall of the arena, and I let the creature follow me, because it would follow me, because I was the only vibrating, breathing thing in this sand pit. And then at the last possible moment, I dropped flat and let it go over me. Not all of it. The edge of one of its rear legs caught my shoulder and sent me spinning, and for a moment the world went white and sideways. I hit the wall. I felt something in my shoulder pop in a way that did not feel good. I slid down the wall and landed on one knee. The Veldrun turned again. It was fast. I had maybe 2 seconds before it located me again by the sound of my panting, so I stopped panting. I held my breath. I pressed my back against the wall, which was made of some kind of compressed stone material, and I stayed completely still. The Veldrun swung its enormous head left and right. The crowd went quieter, which among aliens meant they were paying close attention. In the rows above me, I could see pale faces and dark faces, and faces that had too many features arranged in the wrong order, all of them tilted toward the sand. I reached down with my good hand and picked up a piece of what I recognized as one of my own broken arrows. The handlers had given me arrows. What they had not given me was a bow, because the arena rules said a human weapon was allowed but a human advantage was not. The arrows were for show. Decoration for a creature that was supposed to lose. The Veldrun moved 3 steps to my right. It was listening for me in the empty space ahead of it, which meant it had lost my position. That gave me roughly 4 seconds of window. I had thought about this. 3 days I had spent thinking about it, watching from my cell as they fed the Veldrun, watching how it moved, listening to the handlers talk, and I had noticed one thing. One small thing that nobody seemed to consider important. When the Veldrun ate, it tilted its head to the left side. Always the left. Every single time. Which meant the left side of its neck, just beneath the lowest plate, was a little more flexible than the right. A little softer. I did not have a weapon. I had 2 broken fingers, 1 possibly dislocated shoulder, and a piece of arrow shaft about 9 inches long. I launched off the wall. I covered the distance in a second and a half. The Veldrun detected me immediately, snapped its head around, and I jammed the arrow shaft into the left side of its neck with everything I had. The sound it made was not a roar. It was a deep, shuddering vibration that I felt in my back teeth. It lurched. 2 of its 6 legs folded. The other 4 tried to compensate and it twisted sideways, and I was already dropping clear, rolling across the sand, coming up on my feet with my broken fingers screaming at me, and my shoulder making promises it intended to keep later. The Veldrun did not fall, but it went still. The piece of arrow shaft had struck something important. A nerve cluster, I thought. A pressure point. I had no way to know for certain, and honestly I had no time to celebrate, because the creature was already recovering, beginning to turn toward me again. But the crowd had gone completely silent. And in my experience, when 40,000 aliens go completely silent, something has changed. I looked up. In the Royal Observation Box, a glass-enclosed platform above the western stands, where the wealthy came to watch in comfort and privacy, someone was standing. Someone in a long, dark garment that covered everything except their face, and their face was turned directly toward me, and one slender arm was extended, pointing at me with a single pale finger. The arena master appeared at the edge of the sand. He was Kethvaran, which meant he was tall, hairless, with skin the color of pale clay, and eyes that were entirely silver. He raised both hands toward the Veldrun's handlers. A signal. The handlers moved. They entered the arena, which they had never done while a fight was still running, and they moved toward the Veldrun with the long, charged poles they used for control. The creature responded, retreating, allowing itself to be steered despite its injury, because it knew those poles and what they meant. The fight was over. I stood in the middle of the sand with my bad arm hanging, my broken fingers beginning to swell, and I looked at that figure in the Royal Observation Box, and I thought, this is either the best or the worst thing that has ever happened to me. On this planet, those 2 options were usually the same thing. My cell was not terrible by the standards of the arena. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to paint everything in the darkest colors, and that would not be accurate. The cell had a sleeping surface that was reasonably soft. It had running water. It had a small window that let in the pale yellow light of Kethvara's sun, which was slightly cooler than Earth's, and gave everything a quality like permanent late afternoon. What the cell did not have was a door I could open. What it did not have was any path to anywhere that did not involve the arena sand. What it did not have was any contact with Earth, any news of home, any way to know if anyone back there even knew I was gone. My neighbor in the next cell was a being named Dora. Dora was Selvath, which meant 4 arms, a long tail, and scales in a green so dark they looked black in low light. Dora was also the most practical creature I had ever met in my life. In the 2 years since we had been placed in adjacent cells, Dora had taught me 12 things about Kethvaran society, 40 words in the dominant language that would keep me alive, and 1 irreplaceable piece of medical knowledge about the Veldrun's nervous system, which I had just used. I sat on my sleeping surface and held my right hand with my left and waited for Dora to say something. "You are shaking," Dora said. Dora's voice was low and smooth, like stones shifting underwater. The Selvath did not have a separate concept for statements and questions. Everything was both. "I know," I said. "It will pass." "The figure in the observation box," Dora said. "You saw it." I saw. "You know who it was," Dora said. It was not a question. Dora rarely asked pure questions. I shook my head. I know what it means when someone in that box points at a fighter. I do not know who the person is. Dora was quiet for a moment. Through the wall between our cells, I could hear the faint sound of movement, which meant Dora was pacing. which Dora only did when something significant was happening. Her name is Sarathval, Dora said finally. She is the third child of the Emperor. That makes her a princess. Not the heir, not the spare, the third, the one the court does not watch closely enough. You say that like it is important. It is extremely important, Dora said, because the ones the court does not watch closely enough are usually the ones doing the most interesting things. I turned this over in my mind. My shoulder was aching deeply now. I rotated it carefully, checking the range, and decided it was not dislocated after all, just badly bruised. What does she want with a human fighter? I asked. That, Dora said, is the question that is currently making every slaver in this building very nervous. I can hear them. They are talking in the corridor. They are using the careful voices they use when they do not know how much trouble they are in. I looked at my broken fingers. Two of them, the middle and ring finger of my right hand, had bent in a direction that fingers are not meant to bend. I needed to set them. I did not have anything useful for that purpose, so I used the edge of my sleeping platform and a strip torn from my sleeve, and I reset them myself, which was an experience I will not describe in detail. I will only say that I had done it before, and that the second time was not significantly better than the first. When I was done, I sat back and breathed steadily until my vision cleared. Dora, I said. Yes. What is the rite of Veth? There was a long silence. Then, Dora made a sound that I had learned, over 2 years, was the Selvath equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Where did you hear that phrase? Dora asked. The handlers. When I was being walked back, one of them said it to the other. He said the word Veth, and then the other one stopped walking. Another silence. When Dora spoke again, the voice was very careful. The rite of Veth is an ancient royal decree. It has not been invoked in approximately 300 years. It binds a chosen champion permanently to a royal bloodline as a soul shield, a protector, not a servant, not a slave. A soul shield exists outside the ordinary hierarchy of the court. They answer to no one but the royal who invoked the rite, and in exchange, they are granted legal personhood under the full protection of the crown. I was quiet for a moment. Legal personhood, I said slowly. Under Kethvaran imperial law, Dora said, you are currently property, registered as such, purchased from the collectors at a price I will not repeat because it would insult you. If the rite of Veth were invoked for you, you would no longer be property. You would have a legal identity, rights, a name on imperial documents that cannot be bought or sold. I looked at the small window. The pale yellow light was fading toward evening. She watched me fight a Veldrun, I said. Yes. And she wants to invoke an ancient royal rite that hasn't been used in 3 centuries. That appears to be what is happening, Dora said. For a human. Apparently the fact that you are human is not the obstacle you might think it is, Dora said. The rite of Veth has no species restriction. It was written before the compact existed. It was written when the Kethvarans were still fighting among themselves, and a royal needed a champion who would not be tempted by any other noble's offer. The only requirement is that the royal choose freely, and that the champion accept. I thought about that word, accept. For 4 years, I had not chosen anything. I had been taken from a survey mission on the edge of known space. I had been catalogued, tagged, transported, sold, and placed in an arena. Every morning I woke up and my only choices were how to survive the day, and even those were limited by the walls around me and the handlers outside my door. The idea that someone was about to ask if I accepted something felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. I could not see the bottom. I did not know what accepting would mean, not really. I knew what Dora had told me, but ancient laws and actual practice were different things, and this was a political situation I did not fully understand, involving a princess I had never met, in a court I had only ever seen from the sand of an arena. Dora, I said. Yes. Why does she need a soul shield? Doesn't she have royal guards? The shifting sound again. Dora pacing. The royal guards answer to the emperor, Dora said quietly. And the emperor is old, and the court is dividing itself between those who want the eldest child to inherit and those who want someone else, someone more controllable. Sarathval has been very careful for years. She is quiet in court. She does not make speeches. She does not take sides publicly. But she is not neutral. She is simply patient, and a patient person, eventually, needs someone to stand next to who was not already standing next to someone else. I understood. The guards were bought. The court was compromised. She needed someone with no history on this planet, no loyalties to any faction, no debts or promises already made. She needed someone from somewhere else entirely. She needed something the court had never planned for. In the corridor outside my cell, I heard footsteps, multiple sets, the measured, formal stride of people who were important and knew it. I stood up. I did not know exactly why. Some instinct that predated 4 years of arena survival. Something older, from a life before this one. I straightened my back. I faced the door. It opened. 3 tall Kethvaran officials in formal court dress entered first, their silver eyes scanning the cell with expressions I had learned to read as controlled distaste. They positioned themselves on either side of the door. Behind them came 2 more, these ones in darker clothing, guards of some kind, moving with professional economy. And then she entered. She was not what I expected. I had built an image in my mind from 4 years of watching the Kethvaran elite, the people in the high boxes, the ones whose clothes cost more than the arena itself. I had expected something cold and formal, something that looked at me the way a person looks at an interesting rock they are considering adding to a collection. Sarathval was young, not young in a naive way, but young in the way of someone who had been required to be older than their years for a long time, and carried the weight of that quietly. She was tall, like all Kethvarans, with the pale clay skin and silver eyes. But where most Kethvaran expressions settled into careful blankness when they were in public, hers was different. There was something active behind her eyes, something that was looking at me, the same way I was looking at her, taking measure. She stood in my cell doorway and looked at me for a moment, without speaking. Then she said, in the common galactic trade language that everyone from the compact learned, and that I had spent 4 years getting fluent in, "You are smaller than I expected." "You watched me put down a Veldrun," I said. "How small did you think I was going to be?" One of the officials made a sharp sound, a reprimand. I ignored it. Sarathval's expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. The faintest shift. If I had to name it, I would have said it looked like someone finding the thing they were looking for. "My name is Sarathval," she said. "I think you already know that." "I know it now," I said. "I am going to invoke the right of Veth," she said. "I am going to name you my soul shield. The court is going to argue about whether that is legal. They are going to argue about whether a human can hold that position. They are going to make a great deal of noise." She paused. "I want you to know, before I do it, that I am doing it because I have watched every fight you have had in this arena for the last 8 months, and you are not what they think you are. And neither am I." I looked at her. I looked at the officials behind her, who were clearly unhappy. I looked at the door of my cell, which was open. I thought about the word, accept. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Honesty," she said immediately. "Loyalty to me alone, and the particular quality that allowed you to survive today with nothing but improvisation and determination. That quality has a name," I said. "What is it?" I met her silver eyes. "Being human," I said. She studied me for one more moment. Then she turned to the senior official and said, in formal court Kethvaran that I barely followed, 3 words that made all of the blood drain from the official's pale face. Then she turned back to me. "The right will be announced in court tomorrow morning. Tonight, you will be moved to the palace. You will be given a proper room. Your injuries will be treated." She glanced at my hand. "Both of them." She turned to leave. At the doorway, she paused without looking back. "In Kethvaran court," she said, "when a royal enters the room, those present bow." "I know," I said. A pause. "You did not bow," she said. "No," I said, "I didn't." She left. The officials followed, 2 of them shooting looks at me that I was fairly certain meant something unpleasant. The guards remained. Through the wall, Dora's voice came, very soft. "Marcus," Dora said, "you did not bow to a princess." "I noticed that," I said. "She is going to make you her soul shield." "Apparently. And you opened the conversation by commenting on her expectations about your size." "It came out that way." A long pause. Then Dora made a sound I had never heard before from a Selvath. Low, rhythmic, unmistakably warm. It took me a full 3 seconds to realize. Dora was laughing. "Marcus Vale?" Dora said when the sound faded. "I have been in this arena for 6 years. I have seen many fighters come and go. I have never seen one behave the way you just behaved in front of a princess of the Imperial House." "And?" I said. "And," Dora said, "I think the next few months are going to be either very remarkable or very short. Possibly both." I sat back down on my sleeping surface. Outside the small window, the pale yellow sun of Kethvara had finished setting, and the sky had gone to a deep blue-green that was nothing like Earth's, and beautiful in its own way. Tomorrow, everything would change. I did not know how much. The palace was a different world. I had known, in the abstract way you know things you have never actually seen, that the Kethvaran royal palace was large. Dora had mentioned it. The handlers had talked about the palace the way people far from wealth always talk about it, with a mixture of contempt and longing that they tried to disguise as simple knowledge. But large did not cover it. It was not a building in any way I had a reference for. It was more like a small city that had been convinced to behave like a building. The outer walls alone were the height of a 12-story structure. The corridors inside went on so long that the far end faded into a blue atmospheric haze, and I kept thinking I was looking out a window until I walked toward what I thought was sky and nearly ran into a solid wall that just happened to be painted that color. My room was on the 43rd floor. I know this because a young palace attendant, a Kethvaran whose name I could not pronounce, and who accepted my calling him Lev without visible offense, told me so with the calm confidence of someone who had never considered that the number of floors might be remarkable to a new arrival. The room had a window that actually was a window, looking out over a city of pale stone and silver towers and the green-blue sky, and for a while I stood there and simply breathed. Then the palace physician arrived. He was a small, elderly Kethvaran named Arveth, and he moved with the deliberate caution of someone who had spent a long career around things that could go wrong in interesting ways. He came with a bag, with instruments, and with an expression that suggested he was prepared for most things. He was not prepared for me. It started reasonably. He examined my hand. He studied the broken fingers, the rough setting job I had done myself in the cell, and he made a low sound that I interpreted as professional concern. Then he reached for one of his instruments, which was designed to re-break and set bones using a mild internal current, and I told him how the current would need to be calibrated for human bone density, which was different from Kethvaran, and he looked at me the way you look at something that has just done a trick you were not aware it could do. Then he examined my shoulder, and I explained the specific muscle group that had been overextended and what would help it heal, and he made a note. Then he discovered the 3 other injuries I had been carrying for the past 3 months and not treated, because the arena medical staff had been calibrated for alien fighters, and most of their instruments did not work correctly on a human. And I had learned very early that it was better to manage things myself than to let them try. And I walked him through each one, what it was, why it had occurred, how the human body was compensating, and what the correct response should be. When we were done, Arveth sat back and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on a Kethvaran face before. I studied it for a moment. "You look disturbed," I said. "I am a physician of 37 years, Arveth said. "I have never had a patient explain his own treatment to me. I studied some medicine," I said, "before." "Before," he repeated. It was not a question. He was acknowledging a life that existed on the other side of some enormous event, the way people always acknowledge those things, carefully, and with distance. "I was on a survey mission," I said. 3 other crew members. We were in the outer range of what humans called explored space at the time, which was not very far at all. The collectors found us. I paused. The other 3 were taken to a different facility. I do not know what happened to them. Arveth was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very precisely, "I am sorry." It was such a direct thing to say. Kethvarans, in my experience, were oblique about nearly everything emotional. They approached feeling the way careful scientists approached unstable compounds, from a distance, with protective equipment. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. He left me with medication that would help the shoulder, a proper wrapping for the fingers, and, unexpectedly, a small data tablet loaded with basic palace orientation information, not just maps, but customs, protocols, the names of the significant people I would encounter, and what to expect from them. I turned it over in my hands and looked at the name on the registry of who had ordered its preparation. Sarathval. She had prepared for my arrival, before she had even formally invoked the rite. She had thought ahead. I filed that away. I was learning her. The rite of Veth was announced the following morning. I was present. I was required to be present, standing in the great court of the palace, which was a room so large it had its own weather patterns near the ceiling, actual thin clouds forming and dissipating near the vaulted top, and roughly 300 Kethvaran nobles and court officials were arranged in their designated positions around the central floor. They were dressed in the kind of elaborate formal clothing that only makes sense in a society where having time to wear elaborate formal clothing is itself a statement. Every shade of pale and silver and deep blue, jewelry that moved slightly on its own, animated by small currents, faces arranged in expressions of careful neutrality that hid, very poorly, what was actually burning behind their silver eyes. I was wearing the closest thing to human formal dress that the palace wardrobe department had been able to produce on short notice, which was a dark, fitted garment that was technically Kethvaran in cut, but had been modified for human proportions. I had looked at it for a long moment in my room and decided it was the least of my concerns. Sarathval entered the great court from the eastern arch. She was dressed in deep crimson, the color reserved for formal royal declarations. She walked with a pace that was neither hurried nor slow. It was the walk of someone who had decided exactly what was going to happen and was simply moving through the space between that decision and its completion. She reached the center of the floor. She turned to face the senior court official, an ancient Kethvaran named Lord Tevath who appeared to have been old since before the palace was built, and she began to speak in formal court Kethvaran. I caught about 60% of it. Enough. The court caught all of it. The change in the room was physical. It was like watching a temperature drop. The carefully arranged neutrality on 300 faces cracked, shifted, became something more honest, and considerably less pleasant. I heard the word for human, spoken in various tones around the room, and none of those tones were warm. Lord Tevath responded. I caught words: invalid, inappropriate, unprecedented, concern. Sarathval let him finish. Then she said something short and very precise, and I caught those words clearly, because they were not in formal court language. They were in the trade language everyone used when they wanted to be understood beyond any possibility of misinterpretation. She said, "The right of Veth has no species restriction. Show me the clause that says otherwise." The room was completely silent. Lord Tevath opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No one spoke. Sarathval turned from him, walked to where I stood, and said, in the trade language, clearly enough that the nearest 200 people could hear, "Marcus Vale of Earth, I invoke the right of Veth. I name you my soul shield. Do you accept?" 300 sets of silver eyes were on me. I thought about what accepting meant. I thought about what refusing meant. I thought about the arena sand. I thought about the pale yellow sunlight through a small window, and Dora's voice through a wall, and 4 years of having no choices that actually mattered. "I accept," I said. I did not bow. The room erupted. Not in sound, not immediately, because Kethvarans did not usually erupt in sound, but in movement, the controlled, rapid movement of people who had something urgent to say, and were fighting their own protocol to say it. Lord Tevath raised his hands. Other officials clustered. Sarathval turned back to the room with an expression of complete calm and waited. The official argument lasted 40 minutes. I stood where I was. At one point someone brought me a chair, which I declined, because I had been standing in sand with broken fingers not 24 hours ago, and a formal room was not going to inconvenience me. The conclusion, reached after 40 minutes of debate that Sarathval allowed to run its course before making 2 final statements that apparently settled every remaining legal question, was this: the right of Veth was valid. The document was signed. I had a legal identity in the Kethvaran imperial system. My name was on documents with the royal seal. I was no longer property. After the court session, Sarathval walked with me to a private gallery, a long corridor with tall windows overlooking a courtyard garden, and we walked in silence for a moment. "You did not look nervous," she said. I have been in an arena in front of 40,000 aliens, I said. 300 courtiers is manageable. You did not bow, she said. You mentioned that yesterday. I am mentioning it again, because every person in that room will be talking about it for the next month, she said. In this court, a gesture like that is a declaration. It tells people something about you. What does it tell them? She paused and looked out a window at the garden below. It tells them that you are not what they expected, she said. It tells them that I have chosen something they do not have a category for. She turned to look at me. In a court, where everyone has been placed in a category, that is either very useful or very dangerous. Probably both, I said. The faintest change in her expression, the same shift I had seen in the cell doorway. Tell me about Earth, she said. So I did. We walked that gallery for 2 hours, and I told her about a planet with enormous blue oceans, and complicated weather, and more shades of green than any other color I had ever seen. I told her about a species that had spent most of its history arguing with itself so energetically that it had accidentally invented most of its best technology as a side effect of those arguments. I told her about the 40 years since first contact, the shock of it, the slow grinding reality of learning that the universe was full of civilizations that considered us too young to matter. She listened the way very few people listen, without preparing her response while you are still talking. She asked questions that were precise and sometimes uncomfortable. Your people, she said at one point, when they discovered they were not alone, and that those others considered them inferior, what was the first response? Disbelief, I said. Then anger. Then, in a part of the population that is larger than anyone likes to admit, something that looks like anger, but is actually a very specific kind of determination. Determination to do what? To prove, I said, that the people who called us inferior were wrong. She thought about this. And did that determination produce anything? I thought about the arena, about the Veldrun, about a species that had spent 40 years being told it was primitive, and responded by building, quietly, in the dark, everything it would need for when that changed. I think, I said, that it is still producing. She looked at me with something that I was beginning to recognize as her true expression, the one underneath the court composure, the one she did not show everyone. It looked like recognition. I need to explain some things to you, she said, about why I invoke the right. The real reasons, not the formal reasons. I know the broad shape of it, I said. The court is dividing. Your brothers want the throne. You are the third child, the one no one is watching directly, which means you are the one with room to move. The royal guards answer to the emperor, or to one faction. You need someone outside the structure. She studied me for a long moment. How do you know this? She said. Dora, I said. My neighbor in the arena cells, Selvath. They have been in the arena 6 years and pay close attention to everything. A Selvath slave informed you about imperial court politics. People talk around slaves, I said. They always have. They forget that intelligence is not a function of status. A pause, then, yes, they do. Something moved behind her eyes. What else did your neighbor tell you? That the ones the court does not watch closely enough are usually the ones doing the most interesting things, I said. The pause that followed was slightly longer. I would like to meet this Selvath, she said quietly. That might be something worth arranging, I said. We reached the end of the gallery. She turned to face me, and her court composure was fully assembled again, everything in its place. Tomorrow, she said, you will begin meeting the significant figures of the court. I will tell you about each one before you meet them. There are people here who are allies, there are people who are neutral, and there are people who want me to fail. That third group is patient and well organized. Who leads them? I said. A man named Duke Maltheus, she said. He is the head of the second oldest noble house in the compact. He has been managing the shape of imperial succession for 30 years. He wants the eldest prince on the throne, because he believes he can manage the eldest prince. He cannot manage me, so he wants you removed. He wants me irrelevant, she said. At minimum, he does not know yet what I have done by invoking the right. She looked at me steadily. He will find out tomorrow, and then he will start trying to understand what you are, how you fit into this, whether you are a weakness or a threat. "And what am I?" I said. She held my gaze for a moment. When she answered, it was with complete directness, which I was beginning to understand was her truest quality, the one she had learned to hide in court, and chose to show when she trusted someone enough. "I do not know yet," she said, "but I believe you are something this court has never encountered, and that, right now, is the most valuable thing I could possibly have standing next to me." I thought about the arena sand. I thought about the Veldrun, and broken fingers, and a 9-inch piece of arrow shaft. I thought about what it meant to survive in a place built for your failure. "Then I will try not to disappoint you," I said. "No," she said, and this time, the faintest edge of something warmer came through the composure. "Try not to disappoint yourself. That will be enough." She left. I stood in the gallery and looked out at the courtyard garden below, at the careful, cultivated plants of a world that was not mine, growing in rows that someone had decided made sense. Behind me, I heard Lev, the young attendant, appear at the corridor entrance. "Your evening meal has been prepared," he said, in very careful trade language, "and a message has arrived. From the Arena District. It is from a registered Selvoth resident. The name on the document is Dora." I turned. "What does it say?" I asked. Lev consulted the message with precise attention. "It says, they are going to try to remove you tonight. The men who came to ask questions after you left were not from the court. Watch the food." I looked at the message. I looked at the door of the gallery. I thought about Duke Malthius, and 30 years of managing imperial succession, and how quickly a man like that would move once he understood what had changed. "Lev?" I said. "Yes?" "Where does Sareth Val take her evening meal?" "In the private east dining room," he said. "On this floor." "Take me there," I said, "right now, and bring the message." He moved without hesitation, which told me he was sharper than he appeared, and we moved down the corridor quickly, and all the way there, I was running calculations in my head, the way I had learned to do in the arena. What does an opponent do when a new element appears on the board? They do not wait. They do not assess at leisure. They act immediately, before the new element can settle, before it can build relationships and learn the terrain. Malthius had 30 years of practice. But he had never dealt with a human before. I was counting on the fact that he still did not understand what that meant. We reached the east dining room, 2 guards at the door. Lev spoke to them in rapid Kethvaran and they admitted us, and I entered to find Sarathval seated at a long table, alone, a meal laid out before her that she had not yet touched. She looked up when I entered. Her expression sharpened. "The food," I said, holding up Dora's message. "Don't touch it." She looked at the table. She looked at me. She did not argue, and she did not tell me I was overreacting. She simply pushed her chair back from the table and stood. "Tell me what Dora said," she said. I handed her the message and watched her read it. Her face did not change. The composure held perfectly, but her hands, when she set the message down, were very still in the careful way of someone making them stay that way. "How did a Selvoth in the Arena District know this?" she asked. "I told you," I said. "People talk around those they consider unimportant." A beat. "We need to have Dora brought here," she said. "Yes," I said. "I was going to suggest that." She looked at me for a moment. Then she called for Lev, and she gave 3 rapid instructions, and all 3 of them were exactly the right ones. I stood in the east dining room of the royal palace on a planet 40 light-years from home, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt something unfamiliar. Not safety, not comfort, something more complicated than either. I felt useful. That night, as I stood watch in the outer room of Sarathval's private chambers, while the palace security team quietly dealt with the prepared meal and traced its origin, I thought about what Sarathval had said in the gallery, that she did not know yet what I was. I decided that was fine. I was still figuring that out myself. But I knew this much. I was not what they had bought me for. I was not a spectacle, not a novelty, not an exotic primitive performing in the sand for the amusement of a civilization that thought it knew everything. I was a Marine. I was a human being. I was someone who had spent 4 years watching, listening, and learning in a place designed to break me. And I was, apparently, now a soul shield. Tomorrow, Duke Malthius would begin to understand that. I found myself almost looking forward to it. They came at midnight. not the food. The food had been the test, a probe to see how alert we were, how quickly we would respond. The real attempt was 3 Keth Varen in the dark of a palace corridor, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this kind of work before. I know this because I was still awake at midnight. I had not slept since the arena. My body wanted to. It was carrying 2 broken fingers, a punished shoulder, and the accumulated fatigue of 4 years of arena survival, and it was sending me clear signals about its preferences. I ignored them. I had a feeling, the kind of feeling that has no logical basis but has kept me alive often enough that I pay attention to it, that the night was not done. So I was sitting in the outer room of Serethval's private chambers, in a chair by the door, in the dark, when I heard them. They were good. For Keth Varen court operatives moving through a palace they knew well, they were very good. Their footsteps were nearly silent. They communicated with hand signals rather than words. They had a way in that bypassed the standard guard rotation, which told me they had either bribed someone or studied the schedule for long enough to find the gap. What they had not planned for was a human who was slightly too stubborn to sleep. I heard them first as a change in the air pressure in the corridor, the small shift that happens when a door opens somewhere distant. Then a footstep, lighter than it should have been, and then nothing, which was itself a sound, the deliberate absence of noise. I moved to the inner door of Serethval's chamber. I knocked twice, softly, our agreed signal. Then I placed my back against the wall beside the outer door, in the shadow where the corridor light did not reach, and I held a small decorative vase that I had taken from the room's entrance table when I first arrived, because heavy objects at hand are a habit I developed early and have not managed to stop. The outer door opened inward. The first one through moved to his left immediately, into the room's deeper shadow, which was the professional choice. The second one came through behind him and moved right. The third paused in the doorway, watching the corridor, serving as a rear guard. I brought the vase down on the rear guard's head from behind, at the doorframe. He folded. The second one turned at the sound, and I crossed the distance between us faster than he expected, because he expected a civilian, because the court's file on me said I was an arena fighter, and arena fighters are reactive, they wait, they respond to what comes at them. They are not taught to close distance before the opponent is ready. I am a former Marine. We are taught differently. He got an arm up, which I respected, and the arm stopped my first move and sent a pain signal up through my broken fingers that I did not have time to acknowledge. So I dropped under his guard and drove my elbow into a specific cluster of nerves just below his ribs, the one Dora had described to me in the context of the Veldrun, but which Dora had also mentioned existed in similar form in Keth Varen anatomy. He made a high sound and bent, and I put him on the floor. The first one, the professional, had found his footing by then. He had a blade. It was short, designed for close quarters, and he knew how to hold it. He came at me fast and I went back, which I hated, but I was unarmed, and a blade at close range, against a person who knows how to use it, is serious regardless of how determined you are. He drove me back toward the wall, and I ran out of room, and he made a controlled lunge that I deflected with my forearm, and the blade opened a cut along my forearm that I felt as a burning line. He pulled back for a second strike, and the door from the inner chamber opened, and Serethval stepped through it with a long, thin ceremonial blade that had been mounted on the wall of her inner chamber as decoration, apparently, which meant Serethval kept actual functional weapons displayed as decoration, which was information I filed away for later. The operative looked at her. He recalculated. He was now dealing with 2 problems instead of 1, and one of them was a royal, which changed every calculation about outcome and consequence. His posture changed. The hesitation was small, half a second, but it was there. I crossed the space between us, took the hand with the blade, applied a specific pressure to the wrist joint that encouraged it to open, and the blade fell. I put him on the floor next to his colleague. I turned. Serethval was standing in the doorway with the ceremonial blade at a ready position, wearing the same composed expression she wore in court, as though standing in a dark room at midnight with a weapon was a normal component of her day. The cut on my forearm was producing a significant amount of blood. I pressed my sleeve against it. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Not importantly," I said. She looked at the 3 operatives. None of them were permanently injured. The first 2 were unconscious. The rear guard was beginning to stir. "These are not street criminals," she said. No, I agreed. They came through a gap in the guard rotation. Someone told them when the gap would be, and they moved to the inner corridor instead of your outer entrance, which means they had a detailed floor plan. Maltheus, she said. Almost certainly, I said. But you cannot prove it from this alone. He is careful. She looked at the three men on the floor. The deliberate calm held, but underneath it, I was beginning to read her, and I could see something that was not quite fear, and not quite anger, but occupied the space between them. This escalated quickly, she said quietly. You invoked the right this morning, I said. He would have had hours to respond. He is not the kind of man who takes a changed situation and waits to see what happens. He acts immediately, while the change is still new and you have not yet settled into it. She looked at me. You anticipated this, she said. I suspected it, I said. Dora's message made me more certain. A beat. She looked at my forearm, at the blood soaking my sleeve. Come inside, she said. There is a medical kit in the inner chamber. Then we will summon the palace security commander, and you will tell me what you believe our next steps should be. I followed her inside. She was correct about the medical kit, a small, well-stocked one, and she cleaned and closed the cut with a speed and efficiency that told me this was not the first time she had dressed a wound. I did not ask about that yet. The palace security commander arrived 12 minutes later. His name was Captain Voran, a broad, professionally weathered Kethvaran, with the silver eyes of his species gone slightly clouded with age. He looked at the three operatives, who had been restrained by that point, and he looked at me, at the cut on my arm, at Sereth Val's ceremonial blade still lying on the table where she had set it. He asked questions. Sereth Val answered some of them. I answered others. And then Captain Voran asked a question that I had not expected. The human, he said, to Sereth Val, with only a slight emphasis on the word, intervened before the security alarm was triggered. Before any alert was sent, he was in the outer room before the operatives entered. How did he know they were coming? Sereth Val looked at me. I heard them, I said. Voran studied me. Our corridor sensors did not detect a threat presence. I know, I said, because your sensors are calibrated to detect Kethvaran movement patterns. I am not Kethvaran. I paused, and I noticed something different in the air before they came through. Voran was quiet for a moment. The professional assessment behind his clouded eyes was visible and thorough. Different how? He asked. Pressure change, I said. A distant door opened. The air shifted. Your species' sensory architecture focuses on visual and chemical signals at close range. Humans developed in an environment where the threats we did not see early enough were usually the ones that ended us. We hear things differently. We pay attention to small changes. Another silence. You are saying, Voran said carefully, that human biology provided a security advantage that our technology did not. I am saying, I said, that I noticed something your sensors missed. What you do with that information is your decision. He looked at Sereth Val. She looked at him with complete steadiness. The three operatives will need to be interviewed, she said. Very carefully. I want to know exactly who gave them the guard rotation schedule and the floor plan. Understood, Voran said. He paused. I will also be rotating the guard assignments and recalibrating the sensor systems. Another pause. And I will recommend that the Soul Shield be provided access to security briefings. I had not expected that. I looked at Voran. He met my gaze with the expression of a professional who has just updated his understanding of a situation and is reorganizing accordingly. Thank you, I said. I am not doing it for you, he said, without heat. I am doing it because the safety of this house is my responsibility, and you appear to be relevant to it. Fair enough. Dora arrived at the palace on the third day. Sereth Val had been as good as her word. The paperwork had taken a day and a half, mostly because no one had prepared a category for a Selvath who was simultaneously an arena-registered slave and a requested consultant to a royal household, and the administrative staff had needed time to invent one. But Dora arrived on the third day with 4 limbs, a tail, scales that were dark green in the palace's bright lighting, and an expression of contained interest. I met Dora at the palace entrance. Dora looked at me, then at the palace behind me, then at the city visible through the outer gates. You have done extremely well for yourself, Dora said. considering you were unconscious in sand this time last week." "I was not unconscious," I said. "I was strategically prone." "Of course," Dora said. "My mistake." We walked together through the outer corridor. Dora moved with the slow, careful attention of someone cataloging everything. 4 arms meant twice the capacity for noting detail, and Dora had always used them fully. "The message you sent," I said. "How did you know?" "The men who came to ask questions about you after you left were not from any official body," Dora said. "Their clothing was correct, but their questions were wrong. They asked things that official investigators already know, things that would be in the arena records. What they were actually doing was mapping the situation. I know the difference between someone gathering information and someone who already has it and is deciding what to do next. You sent a warning based on watching men ask questions in a corridor." "I have been in that corridor for 6 years," Dora said. "I know what normal looks like." We reached the room that had been assigned to Dora, smaller than mine but clean, and with a window, and Dora examined it with a methodical thoroughness that covered every surface. "This is better than I expected," Dora said. "Sarathval does not do things halfway," I said. I gathered that from the fact that she found a legal framework to essentially liberate an arena slave and a human military prisoner in the span of 4 days. Dora settled into a seated position that involved all 4 arms in a particular arrangement I recognized as comfortable. "Tell me about Maltheus." So I told Dora what I knew, what Sarathval had told me, what I had observed and inferred. Dora listened without interrupting, which was Dora's way. When I finished, Dora said, "Enfoma. He will not try another direct approach immediately. He is too experienced. He knows the first attempt tells you how the target responds, and he is now reading what the 3 operatives learned. Which is that Sarathval is not isolated," I said. "She had warning. She had someone awake in the outer room. She has a Selvath in the arena district who is paying attention to his people. That last one will concern him specifically," Dora said. "People like Maltheus maintain control by controlling information. They are comfortable with visible threats. They are not comfortable with the idea that a slave in an arena district is monitoring their operatives and sending warnings to a royal house." "What does he do next?" I said. "He tries to understand you," Dora said. "He will pull every piece of information available about humans. He will try to categorize you, and when he finds that the available information is inadequate, he will look for humans who can tell him more." I thought about that. "There are humans in the compact," I said, "in various positions, arena fighters, household staff, some in merchant operations." "Yes," Dora said, "he will speak to them. He will try to build a model of how a human thinks and what a human's weaknesses are." A pause. "And he will find that the model is insufficient. Because? Because humans are not consistent in the way other species are consistent," Dora said. "I have been your neighbor for 2 years. Every species I have shared space with has a range of behavior that I can describe and predict within reasonable bounds. You operate outside that range constantly. You adapt. You improvise. You take information from one context and apply it somewhere it does not obviously belong." A pause. "It is maddening and impressive in equal measure." "Thank you," I said. "I think." "It is not a compliment," Dora said. "It is an observation. But in the current situation, it is a favorable observation." That evening, Sarathval called a private meeting. Present, herself, me, Dora, Captain Voran, and a young woman named Priya, a human who had been working in the palace's archives department for the past 3 years, cataloging historical records. She was slight, serious-faced, with dark eyes that moved quickly, and a habit of folding her hands very precisely in her lap. Priya had been found by Dora's second piece of intelligence work, a network of quiet contacts in the Kethvaran household staff that Dora had spent years cultivating, and she was, according to Dora, the most consistently overlooked person in the entire palace. Which meant she knew a great deal. "Maltheus has begun making inquiries," Priya said, in the trade language, with the accent of someone who had learned it as a second language, but had been speaking it for years, through his household staff. "They have been in the archive stacks twice in the last 2 days, asking for historical records on human physiology and behavioral studies." "What records exist?" I asked. "Very few," Priya said. The compact study of humans was not thorough. They catalogued us quickly, and categorized us as primitive, and therefore of limited long-term interest. The studies focus on physical capacity and entertainment value. A slight pause. They are not accurate, in my assessment. Good, I said. Let them study the wrong records. Sereth Val looked at me. Explain. Malthius is trying to understand what I am, I said. He is looking at the official records, the arena records, the physical assessments, the behavioral studies. All of those were compiled by people who had already decided what a human was before they started looking. They recorded what they expected to see. I paused. If he builds his strategy on those records, he builds it on a foundation that is missing most of the relevant information. Sereth Val was quiet for a moment. You want him to remain misinformed, she said. I want him to remain confident, I said. Confident that he understands the board. There is a difference. A man who knows he is missing information is dangerous, because he is careful. A man who believes he has enough information is dangerous in a different way, one that has edges. Dora made the quiet sound I had come to recognize as agreement. Captain Voren, who had been listening with his arms folded and his clouded eyes moving between us, said, "And when he acts on that confidence? Then we are ready," I said, "and he is not." The room was quiet for a moment. Sereth Val looked out the window at the night city. The blue-green sky had gone dark, and the silver towers were lit from within, and for a moment, she looked very young, and very alone, and very much like someone who had been playing a long game by herself for a very long time. "He will move before the Emperor's health update in 3 weeks," she said, half to herself. "The update will reset the political positions. He will want something decisive before then." "Then we have 3 weeks to prepare," I said. "We have 3 weeks," she said, "and what we know, and what he does not know, is that we have already started." My arm ached. My fingers ached. My shoulder sent regular dispatches about its condition. I ignored them. I had things to do. Outside the window, Kethvara's city burned silver in the dark, and somewhere in one of those towers, a man named Malthius was reading outdated files about humans and drawing conclusions. Every one of his conclusions was wrong. I intended to keep it that way for exactly as long as I needed to. The signal came 12 days before the Emperor's health update. I was with Captain Voren in the Palace Security Center, a low-ceilinged room full of display screens and monitoring equipment, and staff who had quietly started treating me as if I belonged there, which I took as a good sign. We were reviewing the guard reassignments, a process that Voren had undertaken with a thoroughness that I genuinely respected, when a priority alert lit the main display. A ship had entered the Kethvara system, not through the approved transit lanes, not broadcasting standard identification codes. It had come out of faster-than-light travel, at an unexpected vector, which was either a navigation error or a deliberate choice, and it was now broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. Not a distress signal, not a threat, something else. A message. I stood up from the chair I had been occupying and walked to the main display. The message was being translated in real time by the system, and the translation was appearing in trade language, and I read it before anyone in the room had finished processing what they were seeing. "Return our people, or we will make this system ungovernable." 12 words. The room was absolutely silent. I looked at the ship's signature on the display. It was not a compact vessel type. It was not any vessel type in the compact registry. The hull configuration was unfamiliar. The drive signature was unfamiliar. And the weapons profile that the sensors were beginning to assemble was, by any compact standard, primitive. But it was there. It was present in the system, and it had not asked permission. Voren's voice was very controlled. "What is that ship?" he said. I looked at the display for another moment. I recognized certain design elements, things that were unmistakably derived from human engineering, from the proportional logic of it, the way the hull sections were arranged. And there was a designation painted on its side in letters that I could read, and no one else in the room could, because they were in English. UES, Perseverance. United Earthship Perseverance. I stood there, and felt something happen in my chest, that I did not have a precise word for. It was not relief, although there was relief in it. It was not joy, although that was there too. It was something older and more complicated. The feeling of a thread that had been stretched very thin for a very long time, suddenly pulling taut. "That ship," I said, "is from Earth." The silence changed quality. Vorin turned slowly. Every person in the room was looking at me. "It is a human warship," I said, and then, because honesty seemed important at this moment, I was not aware we had built one. This was true. When I had been taken 4 years ago, Earth's faster-than-light capability was new and fragile, and our presence in open space was tentative, small survey ships, and a handful of exploratory craft. The idea that in 4 years, somewhere back home, someone had looked at the situation and decided that what was needed was a warship, this idea was both surprising and not surprising at all. Actually, now that I thought about it, it was not surprising in the slightest. "It has to be a mistake," someone said, one of the monitoring staff. "The ship is a single unit. It is not a fleet. They sent one ship." "Yes," I said. "The system defense fleet has 47 vessels," the same person said. "I am aware. They sent one ship and issued an ultimatum to a fleet of 47 vessels." "Yes," I said again. The room was trying to process this. The Kethvarans around me were doing rapid calculations, the logical, orderly calculations of a civilization that had been doing this for centuries, a civilization that understood military power as a function of fleet size, weapons capability, and strategic positioning. On every axis they were measuring. The Perseverance was outmatched. But they were measuring the wrong thing. "Get me communications access," I said to Vorin. "I need to speak to that ship." "I do not have the authority to grant civilian access to the Defense Communications Network," Vorin said, very precisely. "Then get Sarathval," I said, equally precisely. He was already moving. Sarathval arrived in the security center 7 minutes later. She had come quickly, which meant she had heard the alert and understood the urgency without needing it explained. She read the display. She read the message. She looked at me. "That is your ship," she said. "One of them, apparently," I said. "Yes. Will you speak to them?" "I need to," I said. "But I also need you to understand something before I do. The High Admiral is going to want to respond to this with force. He is going to look at one ship and 47 of his own and see an easy answer." "And it is not easy," she said. "It is not easy," I said, "because the answer is not about the ship. The ship is a message. And the message is that Earth has been building, quietly, for 4 years, without telling anyone in the compact. That is the thing the Admiral needs to process before he does anything irreversible." She looked at the display for a moment. Then she turned to the communications officer. "Connect us to the incoming vessel," she said. "On my authority." The connection took 90 seconds. The display shifted to show the visual feed from the Perseverance's communications array. And then the screen resolved into a face I did not know. She was human. That alone made my breath catch for a moment. A human face, dark-skinned and sharp-eyed, with the kind of bone structure that comes from generations of people who did not have the luxury of softness. She was wearing the uniform of the United Earth Defense Forces, which had not existed when I was taken, and which apparently existed now, and her rank insignia was that of a captain. Her name tag read, Nkosi. She looked at me, at the Kethvaran faces visible around me, and her expression did not change, but I caught the micro-adjustment, the brief flicker of recognition that one human has for another when they find them somewhere unexpected. "You look terrible," she said, in English. I had not heard English spoken by another person in 4 years. The sound of it went through me like a current. "I have had a difficult week," I said, in English. "So I understand," Captain Nkosi said. "We have been tracking the arena registration records. We know what you have been doing." A pause. "We also know about the right of Veth. News travels in interesting ways when people are motivated." "How long have you been in this system?" I asked. 12 hours, she said. "We came in quiet. We wanted to assess before announcing. We assessed." She glanced at something off-screen. "We are announcing." Around me, the Kethvaran staff were listening with complete attention. They understood English in approximately the same way they understood no language they had never encountered, which was to say not at all. But they were watching, and I was aware that everything I said would be translated later and examined carefully. Captain Nkosi, I said, in the trade language now, deliberately, so everyone in the room could follow. We need to establish a secure channel. There are political dimensions to this situation that require careful management. Nkosi switched to the trade language without missing a beat. Her accent was better than mine had been after 4 years of practice, which meant she had been preparing for this for longer than I had been expecting to be rescued. Understood, she said. We are prepared for a formal exchange of communications, but our position remains as stated. We want our people, all of them in this system, and information on the locations of others throughout the compact. Sarathval spoke. I am Sarathval of the Imperial House. You are speaking with a royal of the Kethvaran Interstellar Compact. A pause. Nkosi looked at her. I am Captain Odera Nkosi, of the United Earthship Perseverance, Nkosi said. I understand the protocol. I also understand that the political situation on this planet is complex. We are not here to make it simpler. We are here to make our position clear. Your position is clear, Sarathval said. One ship. Yes, Nkosi said. One ship. Something moved in her eyes that was careful and deliberate. For now. The room's temperature dropped again. Sarathval looked at me. I looked at her. An entire conversation passed in that look, and she was quick enough to read it. We will arrange a secure secondary channel, Sarathval said to Nkosi, within 2 hours. In the meantime, your vessel should hold its current position. Agreed, Nkosi said. We will hold. A pause. Marcus, I am glad you are alive. The feed cut. I stood in the security center and breathed very carefully for a moment. The High Admiral of the Kethvara System Fleet arrived 20 minutes later. His name was Grand Admiral Vethal, no relation to the right, and he was a tall, military-straight Kethvaran, with silver eyes that had gone cold. He walked into the security center with 4 staff officers and looked at the display showing the Perseverance sitting at its holding position, and turned to Sarathval with an expression that was trying to hide the fact that he thought this situation was simple and was irritated that it needed to be explained. One vessel, he said. We have 47. The solution is self-evident. The solution, I said, before Sarathval could respond, is not self-evident. He looked at me. The look was not warm. He knew who I was, what I was, and he had opinions about both. You are the soul shield, he said. This is not a security matter. I spent 4 years in the compact, I said. 12 of those years in communication with other humans in various parts of the system. I know what my species does when it is provoked. This was slightly not true. I had not communicated with other humans for most of my time here, but I knew my species. I knew the history. And I knew the particular quality of rage that had been building on Earth since first contact. The slow, patient, grinding anger of people who had been told they were nothing and had spent every year since building a response to that. One ship is a provocation, Vethal said. One ship, I said, is a message. The message is this. Earth has been building. You did not know. You thought we were still a primitive young species with rudimentary space capability. And we wanted you to keep thinking that. So we kept our development quiet. And we built. And when we had enough, we did not send a fleet. Because a fleet says we are afraid. We sent one ship, because one ship says we are not. Vethal stared at me. You are telling me this ship is deliberately insufficient, he said. I am telling you this ship was chosen, I said. If you destroy it, you validate everything Earth has been saying to its people about the compact for 4 years. You make every decision that comes after easier for Earth to make and harder for you to justify. And you still have not answered the question of what we have been building while you were not watching. A silence. If you do not destroy it, he said, you appear weak. If you negotiate, Sarathval said, you appear thoughtful. In the current political climate, that is not a weakness. He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at the display. What do they want? He said. Their people, I said. All humans currently in the compact to be given legal status and the right of return. Information on where humans are held throughout the system. And a formal acknowledgement that Earth is a recognized independent civilization within the compact framework. Vethal made a sound. They are asking for a complete revision of Earth's status in the compact, he said. Yes, I said. Based on one ship, he said. Based on the knowledge, I said, that we can make this system ungovernable, if you say no. And you do not know what that means, not fully, because you have not paid enough attention to us. But I would encourage you to ask yourself, a species that builds a warship in secret in 4 years, that develops drive technology and weapon systems from scratch, that manages to track arena registration records, and locate a specific human in a specific palace, and send a ship to this system without being detected, what else have they been doing that you do not know about? The room was very quiet. You are bluffing, Vethal said, but it was a question. No, I said. I genuinely do not know what my people have been building. I have been here for 4 years. That is a long time. And the history of my species suggests very strongly that when we are angry and motivated and have a long time with no other distractions, we produce things that surprise people. I looked at the display. The Perseverance sat at its holding position, alone in the vast dark of the system, its hull lit by the cool light of the local star. Negotiate, I said, while you still have the diplomatic advantage, because right now you have the fleet, and we have one ship, and that means the first move is yours, and the first move is always the most powerful one. If you wait, that balance shifts. Vethal looked at Sarathval. Sarathval looked at him with complete composure. The human accords, she said, will need to be drafted. I will take the lead on that, with my soul shield as the human side advisor. You will manage the fleet. We will not cross into each other's lanes. A pause. Are we agreed? A very long pause. Vethal turned back to the display. Hold the fleet, he said to his staff, very quietly. Defensive positions only. No hostile action. He walked out without another word. I let out a breath. Sarathval moved to stand beside me, and we both looked at the display, at the single Earthship in the dark. That was well done, she said quietly. I was making half of it up, I said, equally quietly. I know, she said, but the half you were making up was plausible, and it was based on true things about your species, which is the best kind of bluff. It is not entirely a bluff at all. I looked at the Perseverance. She was right. Earth had built that ship in 4 years. Earth had tracked me here. Earth had sent Captain Nkosi, who switched languages without hesitation, and looked at a fleet of 47 ships and said, 1. For now. What else had they been doing? Honestly, I could not wait to find out. 3 hours later, I sat at a communications terminal with a secure channel to the Perseverance, and Captain Nkosi's face on the screen, and for the first time in 4 years, I spoke freely to another human being about things that mattered. We talked for 2 hours. I told her about Sarathval, and the Right, and Dora, and Maltheus. She told me about Earth, and what the 4 years since my capture had been, and what was waiting for me when I got back. Your parents, she said, at one point. They are alive? I said, before I could stop myself. Your mother is, she said. Your father passed 2 years ago. I am sorry, Marcus. I sat with that for a moment, set it in the place in my head for things I would deal with later. The place was getting crowded. Keep going, I said. She kept going. By the time the channel closed, I had more information than I had processed in 4 years, and a plan that was beginning to take shape, and a feeling like the first breath after being held underwater for too long. But Maltheus was still out there, and he had just watched Earth send a ship to his planet and issue an ultimatum. And a man like Maltheus, when cornered by external pressure, did not negotiate. He moved internally, where he had control. He was going to act, soon. I stood up from the terminal and went to find Sarathval, because whatever came next, it was going to come fast. I was right. It came faster than I expected. It started at 6 in the morning. I know the exact time, because I had been awake for 37 consecutive hours by that point, working through the early-stage framework for what Sarathval was calling the Human Accords, a document that needed to establish legal personhood for every human in the compact, in language tight enough that it could not be reinterpreted away by a motivated legal team later. Priya was helping with the language. Dora was helping with the Kethvaran legal precedents. I was drinking something that Lev had brought me which tasted approximately like burned tea, and seemed to be having a positive effect on my ability to form coherent thoughts. At 6 in the morning, the palace communication grid went dark. Not a power failure. A targeted shutdown. Emergency lighting came on immediately. The red-tinged backup system that gave everything the look of a place where a decision had been made to stop cooperating. The communication screens in every room I could see turned to static. Voices in the corridor outside suddenly dropped to urgent, confused murmurs. Priya looked up from her work. "That is not the normal system." "No," I said. I was already moving. The corridor was bright with emergency lighting and full of confused palace staff moving in the uncertain way people move when the background hum of normal life stops and something else takes its place. I moved against the flow, toward Sarathval's private wing. Dora fell into step beside me, all four limbs moving with that low, quick motion that the Selvath used when they were serious. "Maltheus," Dora said. "Not a question." "He sees the human accords taking shape," I said. "He sees Sarathval moving into a position where she is the architect of a historic diplomatic agreement. That is political capital he cannot let her accumulate. He has to act before it solidifies." I was counting corridors in my head. He is going to try to control the palace communications, and use that control to issue false orders. Standard playbook for a palace seizure. You create chaos, then you direct the chaos. "How do you know about palace seizure playbooks?" Dora asked. "I read a lot of history," I said. "Every culture that has ever had a court has also eventually had someone try to take it from the inside. The methods are not that different. Isolate the target, control communications. Create a reason why the target's authority is suspended." "He will need a reason," Dora said. "A legal framework, even a false one. Kethvaran court succession has strict protocols." "The Emperor's health," I said. "He will announce that the Emperor has made a decision, something that changes Sarathval's position, and with the communications grid down, no one can verify it immediately." We reached the entrance to Sarathval's wing. The two guards who were normally stationed there were gone. That was bad. I stopped. I thought very quickly. The guards being gone meant either they had been called away with a false order, or they had been quietly bought before tonight, or something had already happened inside the wing. 3 possibilities, all of them bad in different ways. "Dora," I said, "go to Captain Voren. Tell him the wing is unguarded, and I am going in. Tell him to bring everyone he has." "And if Voren is also compromised?" Dora asked. "Then bring everyone you trust," I said, which probably means Priya, and the ability to move fast. Dora was already gone. I went through the wing entrance. The inner corridor was empty. This was wrong. Even at 6 in the morning, there were staff. Always. Sarathval's household ran on a schedule that did not stop for irregular hours. Empty corridors in a palace at 6 in the morning meant that the people who should be there had been told to be somewhere else. My footsteps were as quiet as I could make them on the polished floor. The emergency lighting made every doorway a choice. I moved with my back to the wall, checking each one, reaching for the instincts that 4 years in an arena, and years before that in military service, had built in me so deeply that they ran before thought. The outer reception room of Sarathval's private chambers, empty. The intermediate room, empty. The door to the inner chamber was ajar. I pressed flat against the wall beside it and listened. Inside, 2 voices. Kethvaran. One was Sarathval's, contained and precise. The other was a male voice I did not recognize from sound alone, but the tone was the tone of someone who believed they had already won. That tone is always a mistake. I went through the door low and fast. The room, Sarathval standing near the center, 3 of Maltheus's operatives arranged in a triangle around her, and in the far corner, a 4th figure, older, in the dark formal clothing of a senior noble, watching with the patient expression of a man who had spent 30 years engineering outcomes, and was watching another one complete. Maltheus. He was older than I had pictured him. They always were. Tall even for Kethvaran, with silver eyes that had gone almost entirely clear with age, and a face that had the particular quality of someone who had mastered the art of looking like the most reasonable person in any room. He looked at me with an expression that contained, beneath its composure, a version of the look I had seen on people who had planned for most things, and had not planned for me. "The human," he said, in the trade language, precise and unhurried. You are faster than I expected. Everyone says that, I said. The three operatives moved, not all at once, which would have been more dangerous, but in sequence, because they had a system, and the system was designed for Kethvaran opponents, who moved in predictable ways. I was not a Kethvaran opponent. The first one came from my left, and I moved toward him instead of back, inside his reach before his hands found me, and I used the momentum of his own move against the direction of his balance, which is a thing that works on most species with bilateral symmetry, and he went down. The second was already adjusting, coming from the right, and I put a forearm across his path and drove upward into the pivot point of his stance, and he staggered. The third grabbed me from behind, which was actually the right tactical choice, and for a moment I was held, both arms locked. I drove my head backward. Kethvaran facial structure does not have the same concentration of sensitive tissue that the human face does, so this did not disable him, but it made him adjust his grip for a fraction of a second, and that fraction was enough. I dropped my weight, pulled his arms forward with me, and he came over the top, and then we were on the floor, and I had a different arrangement of limbs than he had planned for. 12 seconds. All three operatives were on the floor. I was breathing hard. My shoulder was making strong objections. My fingers had strong feelings about what I had asked of them tonight. I stood up and looked at Malthius. He had not moved. He was watching me with that composed expression, but something had changed behind the clear silver eyes. He was revising. "You are not in the files," he said. "No," I said, "I am not. The behavioral assessments suggest that humans engage in reactive combat patterns," he said, almost to himself. "They respond to threat rather than initiating." "The behavioral assessments were done in an arena," I said, "where the rules require a certain performance, where the audience expected a certain kind of fight, where the handlers measured what they saw." I moved toward him, slowly, giving him the chance to reconsider whatever his next thought was. I was giving the audience what they paid for. That is not the same thing as my actual capability. Malthius looked at me for a long moment. The cold composure of 30 years of court maneuvering held, but there was something behind it that I recognized. Not fear, something more controlled. Recalculation. "You cannot win this," he said. "The communications grid is down. My people are throughout the palace. The Emperor's health statement will be issued in 20 minutes through alternative channels, and the statement will require Sarathval's immediate removal from all active political affairs pending a review." "A false statement," Sarathval said. She had not moved. Her voice was steady. "A necessary statement," Malthius said. "One that will serve the stability of the succession. When Lord Arevthan takes the throne, this period will be understood as a necessary correction." "Lord Arevthan," Sarathval said, "my eldest brother, who has been managed by you for 20 years and does not know it." Something moved in Malthius's expression. "He will be an excellent emperor," he said. "He will be your instrument," she said, "and you will manage the compact through him for however long you have remaining, and the human accords will be quietly buried, because Arevthan does not care about humans, and neither do you, except as a category of property that generates revenue." "The accords are a disruption," Malthius said, a destabilizing diplomatic gesture that serves no long term. "It serves my long-term interest," said a new voice. Everyone turned. Captain Nkosi was standing in the doorway. She was in full uniform. 2 Earth Defense Forces personnel flanked her, in the practical, functional armor that Earth had apparently developed in the last 4 years. Armor that looked like it had been designed by people who wanted it to actually work, rather than look impressive. I stared at her. "How are you here?" I said. "You are on the Perseverance." "The Perseverance has a shuttle," Nkosi said. "And this palace has a landing platform on the northern roof that your friend Priya identified in the architectural records." She looked at Malthius with the expression of someone who has been briefed on a situation and has formed a clear opinion. "You are Duke Malthius." "I am," he said. He was handling her presence with remarkable composure, recalculating again, folding this new element into his framework. "You have spent 30 years managing the Kethvaran imperial succession," Nkosi said. "That is an impressive career. It ends tonight." "You have no authority here," he said. "I have the authority of a ship sitting in your system that has not been destroyed," Nkosi said, "which tells every other faction in this court that someone made a decision to negotiate instead of act. And the negotiation is happening with Sarathval. which means her political position is already stronger than yours, regardless of whatever statement you are planning to issue in 20 minutes. Malthius looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at Sarathval. He was running the calculation. He was running it against everything he knew. Every angle, every variable, every piece of the board. And I watched the calculation conclude. Not defeat. Malthius was too experienced to fully concede a position in the moment. But I could see the revision, the pulling back from the immediate action to the longer game. He was deciding this moment was not the one. You will not be able to prove the communications shutdown was my doing, he said. We will not need to, Sarathval said. The 3 operatives in my inner chamber will be interviewed. The guard rotation irregularities will be documented, and the alternative communication channel you plan to use will be traced to its origin, because my archivist has already been tracking the palace information systems for the past 2 weeks. A pause. I know, Malthius. I have known for some time. I was waiting for you to commit. The silence that followed was very long. Then Malthius straightened. He adjusted the fall of his formal jacket. He looked at the room with an expression that was, remarkably, still composed. Then I should take my leave, he said. You should, Sarathval said. Under escort, and you will remain in your house residence pending a formal inquiry. The security protocols on your household communications will be activated immediately. He looked at her for one final moment. You are better at this than I expected, he said. It was not a compliment. It was an honest assessment, the kind that men like Malthius make when they stop underestimating someone too late. Yes, she said simply. I am. Captain Voran arrived with a full security detail 3 minutes after Malthius was escorted out. He looked at the scene, at the 3 operatives, at the 2 Earth Defense Forces personnel standing quietly by the door, and at me. Are you injured? He asked. My shoulder dislikes me, I said. Nothing serious. Voran looked at the Earth personnel. You came down from the ship. Yes, said one of them, a young man named Callum, who spoke the trade language with an accent that suggested it was fairly new to him. Through the restricted northern airspace, Voran said. We filed a flight plan, Callum said. It went to the Northern Landing Platform controller. The Northern Landing Platform does not have a controller at 6 in the morning, Voran said. We know, Callum said. It filed successfully anyway. There was a pause. Your people are very casual with the concept of authorization, Voran said. We try, Callum said. I found Sarathval standing at the window of the inner chamber as the activity in the room behind her sorted itself out. Security personnel, medical staff arriving for the operatives, Dora and Priya appearing in the doorway with the slightly breathless quality of people who had been moving very fast for 20 minutes. She was looking out at the city. The sky was beginning to lighten at the eastern edge, the blue-green going pale, and the silver towers were losing their night-lit glow and becoming simply buildings in early morning. I stood next to her. It worked, she said. Most of it, I said. He is not done. He will regroup. He has resources we have not mapped yet. I know, she said. But the inquiry will take weeks. The communications shutdown is documented. 3 operatives are in custody. His position in the court has been weakened enough that the other nobles who were watching to see which way to commit will reconsider. She paused. And the Accords. The Accords are stronger now, I said, because Nkosi came down, because Earth sent people into this palace in the dark of the morning, because whatever the court thought of one ship in the system, they are now factoring in people who actually showed up. Yes, she said. She was quiet for a moment. I need to sleep. Yes, I said. So do you. Shortly, I said. She looked at me. You have not slept in 37 hours, she said. 39 now, I said. But I need to talk to Nkosi first. And then I need to talk to Dora about the Accords language. And then I need to find out what Priya found in the communication trace. Marcus, she said. My name in her voice, said with simple directness, was something I had gotten used to enough that I no longer noticed the moment it stopped being strange. The crisis is over for tonight. For tonight, I said. A pause. Malthius will move again, she said. Not with operatives. He will try something more fundamental. I know, I said. But I have been thinking about that, about what his next move is, and I think I know what it is. Tell me. He will go for something that makes everything we have done irrelevant, I said. Not me. Not you. The Accords themselves. He will try to destroy the legal foundation before it can be ratified. He will target the document. She looked at me. Then we need to move faster than him, she said. Yes, I said. We do. In the corridor behind us, the sounds of the palace reassembling itself into something like a normal morning were beginning. Voices, footsteps, the distant hum of systems coming back online as the communications grid was restored. Nkosi appeared at the doorway of the inner chamber. She looked at the two of us, then at the room, then at the lightning sky through the window. I sent a preliminary report to the Perseverance, she said. They are informing Earth Command. A pause. There will be more ships. Sarathval looked at her. How many? She asked. Nkosi looked at me. There was something in her eyes that was careful and precise, and also, very briefly, proud. Enough, she said. That single word landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples were going to be significant. I thought about Earth, about 40 years of being called primitive, about the particular quality of determination that lives in a species that has been underestimated for long enough, about everything that had been quietly, patiently, seriously built in the years while I was in an arena in the sand. I thought about the Perseverance, one ship, the message of it. Enough. Then we have work to do, I said. And we went back to it. Malthius moved 8 days later. Not with operatives this time. Not with a false statement or a communications shutdown. He moved with something more precise and more dangerous. The tools of a man who had spent 30 years in imperial court politics and had learned that the sharpest weapons are the ones that look like procedure. He filed a formal legal challenge to the human Accords. Not a general challenge, a specific, targeted challenge to the legal validity of the right of Veth, as applied to a non-Kethvaran individual, and by extension, to the authority of a soul shield who was not Kethvaran to represent human interests in an imperial treaty process. His argument was technical and exhaustively documented, 97 pages of Kethvaran imperial law and historical precedent, and the legal team he had retained had clearly been working on it for longer than 8 days, which meant he had prepared this in parallel with the more direct approaches he had already tried. He was right that the Accord's foundation ran through the right of Veth. If the right was invalidated as applied to me, my status as Sarathval's soul shield became questionable, and with it, my role in the drafting process, and with it, the human voice in the document itself. Priya brought me the filing at 3 in the afternoon. She set it on the table in front of me, and looked at it with the expression of someone who has spent considerable time reading legal documents and has strong feelings about this particular one. It is well constructed, she said. How long do we have to respond? I asked. 14 days. Under standard imperial filing protocols, she said. The challenge goes to the Imperial Legal Council. 3 senior jurists. Their ruling takes precedence over political considerations. Who are the 3 jurists? I asked. She named them. I recognized 2 of the names from the briefing documents Sarathval had prepared for me in the first days. Both were known as strict proceduralists, which meant they would rule on the law as written, and would not be moved by political pressure. The third? I asked. Lord Jurist Helvin, Priya said. He is the oldest member of the council. He has been on it for 40 years. He has a reputation for unexpected rulings. Unexpected how? He does not always rule the way people expect, she said. Sometimes this favors traditional interpretations. Sometimes it does not. He is considered unpredictable. I looked at the filing. I thought about the right of Veth as Dora had described it to me in the arena cell. An ancient law, written before the compact existed, with no species restriction, because species had not yet been a category that mattered when the law was written. Pull the original text of the right, I said, not the current code, the original document, whatever language it was drafted in. Priya looked at me. The original is in ancient Kethvaran, a dialect that has not been spoken for approximately 400 years. Can you read it? A pause. I can read it slowly. Then read it slowly, I said. Starting now. She went to the archives. I went to find Sarathval. She was in the East Gallery. the long corridor with the tall windows where we had walked on the third day. She was alone, which was unusual. Standing at a window, looking at the courtyard below with an expression that she rearranged slightly when she heard me approach. Not hiding it, but putting it into order, the way you straighten a room when someone enters unexpectedly. "You saw the filing," she said. "Yes." "He is trying to remove the foundation," she said. "If the right is invalidated, the Accords lose their human voice. They become a document about humans, written entirely by Kethvarans, and the legal council accepts that document as valid, and Earth gets a paper agreement that can be reinterpreted." "I know," I said. "Captain Nkosi is preparing a statement," she said. "Earth is considering this a hostile act against the diplomatic process." "It probably is," I said, "but we cannot respond to it as a hostile act. Not yet. Because if we respond with pressure before the legal council rules, we look like we are trying to override the rule of law, and that undermines everything the Accords are supposed to establish." She looked at me. "So we fight it legally," she said. "We fight it legally," I said. "And I have Priya pulling the original text of the right. Because Malthias's challenge is based on the current legal code's interpretation of the right, and I have a feeling that interpretation has accumulated additional meaning over 400 years that was not in the original." She studied me. "You think the original text supports a broader application?" "I think the original text was written by a people who had not invented the concept of species hierarchy yet," I said. "And I think when you write a law before a concept exists, the law does not contain the limitation that the concept would have created." She was quiet for a moment. "If you are right," she said, "the challenge fails on its own terms. The law as originally written does not restrict the right to Kethvarans. The current code's interpretation assumed a restriction that was never actually there." "That is the argument," I said. "It is a good argument," she said. Then, after a pause, "Malthias's legal team had 40 years of compact history to build their case. We have 14 days and Priya reading 400-year-old dialect." "I know," I said. A longer pause. "It will need to be convincing," she said. "Everything we have done so far has needed to be convincing," I said. "We are still here." She looked at me with that expression, the real one, the one underneath the court composure. "Yes," she said, "we are. We worked for 6 days straight. Priya was extraordinary. She worked through the ancient text with the careful, methodical attention of someone who understood that every word mattered, cross-referencing against historical records, against the context of the period when the right had been written, against the specific circumstances that had led to its creation. Dora helped structure the argument, applying Kethvaran legal logic to the framework Priya was building. I read every draft and pushed back on every point that needed to be harder or cleaner, because the 3 jurists would be looking for any place the argument could be questioned. On the 4th day, Priya found it. She came into the working room at 2 in the morning, which was when most of the significant discoveries had been happening, and she put a single sheet of translated text on the table in front of me without a word. I read it. Then I read it again. The original right of Veth, in its 4th clause, used a term that had been translated in the current legal code as subject of the realm. The current code interpreted this as meaning a Kethvaran citizen, but the original term, in the ancient dialect, was considerably broader. It referred, Priya's translation showed, to any being who existed within the space of the world, which in the context of when it was written, meant anyone under the sky, anyone physically present and real. Not a citizen, not a species, a being. "That is the clause," I said. "Yes," Priya said. She looked tired, in the way of someone who has been running on intellectual momentum for 4 days, and has just seen the finish line. "Malthias's challenge relies on the interpretation that subject of the realm means Kethvaran citizen, but the original term predates the concept of Kethvaran citizenship by 100 years. It was written for a world that had not yet divided itself by those lines." "How confident are you in the translation?" I asked. "Completely," she said. "I checked it 6 times. The term is unambiguous in the ancient dialect. It was only ambiguous after it was translated into the modern code, because the modern translators applied a contemporary assumption." She paused. "They were not wrong to do so. In the context of modern Kethvaran law, the assumption was reasonable. They simply did not know that one day someone would need the original meaning." I looked at the text for a long moment. Draft the counter-argument, I said. Complete. Legal standard format. We submit in 3 days. I will need Dora's help with the structural formatting, she said. Dora is right there, I said, gesturing at the corner of the room where Dora was currently in a resting position that Selvath used when they were thinking rather than sleeping, all 4 limbs folded in a specific pattern, eyes half open. I have been listening, Dora said, without moving. I will help. But I want it on record that I have been awake for approximately 90 hours, and I am doing this under protest. Noted, I said. Thank you, Dora. You are welcome, Dora said, and unfolded from the resting position with the unhurried precision of someone who has decided to continue regardless. We submitted the counter-argument on the 8th day. Malthias's legal team received it and went quiet for 24 hours. I took that as a sign that they had found the issue and were trying to find a way around it. On the 10th day, a message came from Malthias directly, addressed to me, not to Sarathval, which was itself a significant signal about how his thinking had shifted. It was short. It said, in very precise trade language, the original text is not admissible as legal precedent. It was superseded by the modern code 300 years ago. I read it. I set it down. I thought for a moment. Then I wrote back, equally short. The modern code's translation of an original text is admissible as legal interpretation. But if the translation misrepresents the original takes precedence. This is not a new principle. It is the foundation of Kethvaran legal historicism. See, Tevath precedent, 2nd cycle, ruling 14. I had found the Tevath precedent on day 3. Priya had found it. It was a 300-year-old ruling by a different legal council on a completely different matter that had established, with great clarity, that when a modern code translation of an ancient document was shown to contradict the original meaning controlled. Malthias went quiet for another day. On the 12th day, the Imperial Legal Council announced they had received all submissions and would rule within 48 hours. 48 hours is a long time when you are waiting. I spent part of it with Nkosi, who had moved from the Perseverance to a set of rooms in the palace during the legal process, a decision that had been formally opposed by 3 court officials and quietly approved by Sarathval. We sat in the small room that Nkosi had turned into a functional command post, with displays showing the positions of the Perseverance and, now, the 2 additional Earth vessels that had arrived 4 days ago, and we talked about what came after. If the Council rules for us, Nkosi said, the Accords can be ratified. And if they rule against us, I said, Earth will have to decide how to respond.
Earth has already decided, Nkosi said. The decision was made before I left.
If the Accords fail through legal maneuvering, Earth will formalize its position as an independent sovereign state outside the Compact framework and establish its own diplomatic protocols. That means no Compact membership, I said. Correct. And no Compact membership means no formal protections for humans currently held in the Compact. Also correct, she said, which is why the Accords need to succeed. A bad outcome here is worse than a slow process. She looked at me. But it also means Malthias does not win by making the Accords fail. He just changes the game board. Earth has decided it would rather have a formal position, even an adversarial one, than an ambiguous one. I thought about this. I thought about the Perseverance arriving in this system alone, about Captain Nkosi switching languages without a pause, about the word that Nkosi had used when Sarathval asked how many ships were coming. Enough. He has not thought about what Earth looks like without the Compact, I said. No, Nkosi agreed. No one in the Compact has. They have been thinking about Earth as a problem within the existing framework. They have not considered what happens if Earth simply builds its own framework and stops asking permission. I looked at her. Is that what we would do? I said. That is what we have already been doing, she said. For 4 years, quietly. The Perseverance is not the only ship we have built. It is the one we decided to show first. She paused. Malthias's legal challenge assumes that if the Accords fail, Earth is left with nothing. He does not understand that Earth's nothing and the Compact's nothing are different. On the 47th hour, the Imperial Legal Council announced its ruling. The ruling was 30 pages. Priya read it in 40 minutes, because the ruling was written in formal legal language, and she had been deep in ancient dialect for 2 weeks. and formal legal language felt simple by comparison. She came to where I was standing in the corridor outside the council chamber, with the document in her hands, and her expression carefully neutral, the expression of someone who has good news, and is very aware that good news delivered with too much visible relief is its own kind of pressure. "The challenge is rejected," she said. I breathed. "The council ruled that the original text of the right controls its application," she said. "The modern code's species-specific interpretation was an implied addition, not an explicit one. The right as originally written applies to any being present within the imperial jurisdiction. The challenge has no valid legal foundation." She paused. Lord Jurist Helvin wrote the lead opinion. It is eloquent. What did he say? He said, and I am quoting very carefully here, that the law does not become wiser by becoming narrower, and that a restriction invented 400 years after a document was written does not belong to that document. I stood in the corridor and let that settle. He said something else, Priya said. Not in the ruling. He issued a personal statement alongside it, which is unusual for a jurist of his seniority. He said that the legal challenge had the effect of making the council examine a document it had not examined in its original form for 3 centuries, and that this examination had been, he used the word illuminating. Illuminating, I said. He found other things in the original text, Priya said. Things that the modern code had also simplified in ways that the original did not intend. He is recommending a full review of the ancient texts. She looked at me. He credited the submission from the human legal team. I looked at Priya. She had a small, private expression, the kind that happens on someone's face when they have done something that mattered, and have been told, formally and in public, that it mattered. Priya, I said. Yes? You found the clause, I said. At 2 a.m, she said. You did the translation work that made this possible, I said. Dora structured it, she said, immediately. Dora helped structure it, I said. You found it. You spent 4 days in 400-year-old dialect when you could have told me it was not possible. A pause. Thank you. She looked at her hands for a moment. I have been in this palace for 3 years, she said, reading other people's histories, cataloging other people's decisions. I wanted to be part of something that mattered. She looked up. This mattered. Yes, I said. It did. I went to find Sarathval. She was in the council chamber anteroom, with Nkosi, and when I entered, she turned and one look at my face was enough. She exhaled, a very controlled breath, and something in her posture shifted. It held, she said. The challenge is rejected, I said. The right is valid. The accords proceed. Nkosi was already reaching for her communication device to relay the ruling to the Perseverance. Sarathval looked at me for a long moment. There is still ratification, she said. It needs to go to the full court, and Maltheus still has allies. Yes, I said, but the legal foundation is solid now. He cannot attack the document's legitimacy from the inside. He can only oppose it politically, in the open, where the court can see him doing it. And the court will recalculate, she said. The court has been watching Maltheus for 30 years, I said. They know who he is. They have been waiting to see which way the wind was settling before they committed. The wind is settling. She looked at me steadily. How certain are you? She said. I thought about the arena, about 30 seconds of absolute commitment to a plan that might not work, about the difference between certainty and momentum. Not certain, I said, but moving. And moving is better than standing still in a place like this. She nodded. Then we keep moving, she said. In the corridor behind me, Dora's voice. I am going to sleep now, for a very long time. Someone can find me when the next crisis begins. Reasonable, I said. I was not going to sleep. Not yet. There was ratification to prepare for, and Maltheus to track, and a conversation with Nkosi about what the Accord's success meant for the next phase of Earth's position in the compact. But I stood in the anteroom for a moment and let myself feel the ruling settle in, the weight of it, the reality of it. A ruling that said a human was valid, that a being was a being, regardless of where they came from, that a law written before the idea of species hierarchy existed still had the power to see past it. Outside the window of the anteroom, the city was going about its afternoon. The pale yellow sun of Kethvara was warm on the silver towers. A world that was not mine. A world where I had been property. A world I had changed slightly in the last 18 days. I turned back to the work. There was still a great deal of it left to do. The Kethvara Accords were ratified 14 days after the legal council ruling. I know this because I was present. I watched it happen from a position in the court that I would not have believed possible 6 weeks ago, standing to Sarethval's right, in the great court with its weather near the ceiling, and the 300 members of the imperial court arranged in their designated positions, and a document on the central table that contained 37 clauses and 104 years of accumulated injustice being formally addressed in the language of law. The final vote was not unanimous. It was not close to unanimous. Malthius's faction held together, and there were genuine disagreements among the neutral nobles who had spent weeks calculating and had reached different conclusions. But it was a majority, a clear majority. And when the count was announced, and Lord Tavath's ancient voice read the result into the formal record, the court went very still. I looked at Sarethval. She looked forward. Her expression was composed, but her hands were still in the careful way I had learned to read, and I knew what was underneath. After, in the east gallery, the long corridor with the tall windows, she stood at the same window she had stood at on the third day, the one overlooking the courtyard garden, and she did not say anything for a while. I stood next to her, and also did not say anything. After a while she said, "I have been working toward this for 3 years." "I know," I said. "It is strange," she said, "when a thing you have been moving toward for a long time actually arrives. It is not what I expected it to feel like." "What did you expect?" "More," she said simply, "and also less. I do not know how to explain that. I thought about the arena, about the moment after the Veldrun went down, when I had stood in the sand with my broken fingers and my shoulder, and the crowd going silent, and I had not felt triumphant. I had felt the particular quality of an ending that is also a beginning, the sense that one thing has resolved and something else, larger and less clear, has started." "I think I understand," I said. She looked at me. "What happens now?" she said. "For the Accords," I said. "Implementation. Every human in the compact registered under the new legal status. Information on locations shared with Earth. The right of return formalized. Captain Kosi will coordinate with the implementation team." "And for you?" she said. I had been thinking about this for 2 weeks. Since the night of the communications shutdown, since the moment when Malthius had been escorted out, and the crisis had resolved and the next task had begun, and I had not stopped long enough to actually think about myself, about what I was doing, about what I wanted. "I need to go home," I said. She did not change expression, but there was a quality in the stillness that followed. "Yes," she said, "you do." "I have been gone 4 years," I said. "There are people there. Things that need to be addressed." A pause. "My father." She knew about my father. I had told her. One evening, when the work had paused briefly, and she had asked, and she had listened in the way she listened, fully, and without rushing to fill the space after. "Yes," she said again. "You should go home." I looked at the garden below. The plants were in a different phase now than when I had first seen them, some of them flowering, the careful rows of another world's life, doing what life does, regardless of the political events of the beings around it. "The soul shield bond," I said, "under the right of Veth. When I leave. The right does not require physical proximity," she said. I looked. The original text. A pause. Priya checked the translation. I looked at her. "So the bond remains," I said. "If you choose," she said. "It does not bind you." The original text was very clear on that point also. A soul shield who wishes to leave may leave. The choice to return is always theirs. "Priya found that too," I said. "She is thorough," Sarethval said. We stood at the window for another moment. "I will come back," I said. "I know," she said. She turned away from the window. "There is a great deal still to do. Malthius will regroup. The Accords will be contested at every implementation stage by someone. The other compact member states have not formally agreed to extend the Accords' protections to their own territories. There is more. There is always more," I said. Yes, she said. But now there is a foundation to build it on. She looked at me with the real expression, the one she showed when she trusted. You built part of that foundation. We built it, I said. A pause. Yes, she said. We did. The perseverance took me home. It took 17 days in faster-than-light travel, which meant 17 days in a ship full of Earth people, speaking English, eating food that was not quite right, because the supply systems were still being calibrated, but was recognizably food, and sleeping in a bunk that was designed for a human body. I slept for the first 3 days. Real sleep. I do not mean extended unconsciousness. I mean the kind of sleep that repairs something fundamental. The kind that only happens when your body is completely convinced that nothing will try to end you while you are not paying attention. When I woke up on the 4th day and ate a meal and looked out the observation window at the stars going past, I thought about 4 years. 4 years of sand and noise and the daily arithmetic of survival. 4 years of learning to read silver eyes and alien expressions, and the political geometry of a court I had not been born into and was not supposed to understand. I thought about Dora. Dora was still at the palace, not as an arena registrant, not as a slave, but under a new status that Sarathval had established using the same ancient legal foundations that Priya had been excavating. The legal work of the Accords had opened a door that was not just for humans. Several other species whose compact status had been questionable for similar reasons were now being reviewed. Dora had said, when I left, "You have made this planet significantly more complicated." Was it not complicated before? I said. It was complicated in familiar ways, Dora said. Now it is complicated in new ways, which is less comfortable, but considerably more interesting. A pause. I will be here when you return. You seem confident I will return, I said. You will return, Dora said, with the absolute certainty that was one of Dora's most impressive qualities. You have unfinished business here. You always have unfinished business. It is a human trait. Probably, I said. Definitely, Dora said, and reached out with one of 4 arms and put it briefly on my shoulder, which was a Selvath gesture I had learned meant something that translated roughly as, I recognize you as a significant part of my history, and I am glad you exist. I put my hand on Dora's arm for a moment. Thank you, I said, for the information about the Veldrun. You would have figured it out, Dora said. Maybe, I said, but faster with your help. On the 9th day of the journey, Nkosi came to find me in the observation room and sat across from me and started talking, not as a captain briefing a civilian, but as one person talking to another, and she told me things I had not known. She told me about the 4 years since I was taken, about the shift in Earth's population, the particular way that widespread anger, when it has enough time and enough reason, becomes organized, about the people who had understood, very early, that what had happened to me and the others was not an isolated incident, that the collectors operated systematically, and that the compact tolerated and benefited from it. About the decision, made in various governments over a period of about 18 months, to not announce that Earth was building anything. We let them keep thinking, Nkosi said. The surveys they ran after first contact, the assessments they made about our development level, our technological capacity. We let them keep the old data. We did not update it. While you built, I said. While we built, she said. The Perseverance is the 4th ship of her class. The other 3 are in positions throughout the compact that will not be obvious until they are needed. I looked at her. 4 years, I said. 4 years is a long time, when you are motivated, she said. Dora said something like that, I said. Your neighbor in the arena cell? She said. I had told her about Dora on the first day of the journey. Yes, I said. Smart, Nkosi said. Extremely, I said. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. There will be a debrief when we arrive, she said. Formal, days of it. Everything you know about the compact, the court, Maltheus, the legal structures, the key figures, everything. I know, I said. After the debrief, she said, you are free. However that looks for you. Whatever you need to do. I thought about what I needed to do. About my mother. About the address I had memorized from 4 years ago. that might not be the same address anymore, about the world I had left and the world I was returning to. I need to see my mother, I said. Yes, she said. And then I need to come back, I said. She looked at me. To the compact, I said. To Kethvara. There is still work. Malthius will regroup. The implementation of the Accords will be contested. Sarathval needs someone who understands both sides of this situation, and right now, I am the only person alive who does. Nkosi held my gaze for a moment. You know that going back makes you a permanent part of this, she said. Not just the Accords. The whole thing. Whatever comes next. Earth in the compact. The political situation. All of it. I know, I said. And you want that, she said. I thought about it honestly, the way I had been trying to think about things since the ruling, clearly, without the distortion of immediate need or the simplifying pressure of survival. I do not know if I want it, I said. But I think I am needed there, and I think I am possibly the right person for it, in a way that very few other people can be right now. And I have learned, in 4 years of not having choices, that when you are given a choice, and you are also the right person for it, refusing the choice is its own kind of decision, and not always the better one. Nkosi looked at me for a long moment. You have changed, she said. Yes, I said. Not in the ways I expected, she said. I expected harder, more guarded. People who go through what you went through usually come back with the doors closed. They were closed for a while, I said. But not anymore. No, I said. Not anymore. We reached Earth on the 17th day. I will not spend a long time on this. Some things resist description, not because they are too small but because they are too large, and the right words have not been invented for them yet. And trying to force the wrong words into the shape of the right experience is a kind of dishonesty I am not comfortable with. I will say, Earth's blue is different from Kethvara's blue-green. I had forgotten that. I had spent 4 years looking at a sky that was not quite the color of the world that built me, and I had stopped noticing the difference. Because you adapt, because that is what humans do. And then I looked out the observation window of the Perseverance on approach, and saw the specific blue of Earth's oceans from orbit, and I had to look away for a moment. I will say, my mother's address was the same. She had not moved. I will say, she knew I was coming, because Nkosi had sent word ahead, and she met me at the door, with the particular expression of someone who has spent 4 years being told to have hope, by people who are doing their best, and knowing that hope and knowledge are different things, and then one day, the thing they hoped for walks up to the door, and is real. I will say very little else about that. The debrief took 9 days. I sat in rooms with people who were building the future relationship between Earth and the rest of the universe, and I told them everything I knew, about Kethvaran court politics, about the Compact's legal structures, about the key figures and their motivations, about Sarathval, about Dora, about Priya, and her 4 days in ancient dialect, about Malthius, and why he would not stop, and what his next moves were likely to be. On the 6th day of the debrief, a message arrived for me, from Kethvara, from Sarathval. She had been appointed as the Compact's head of the Human Accords Implementation Council. Malthius had responded by filing a formal protest through 3 different legal channels and then, apparently, had gone quiet for several days, which Dora's brief attached note indicated was being interpreted as regrouping. The council was meeting weekly. The implementation was moving. The final line of Sarathval's message read, "The gallery is quiet without you." I read that line 3 times. Then I wrote back. I told her about Earth, about the blue of the oceans from orbit, about my mother's door, about the debrief and the people building the future, and the particular quality of a world that had spent 4 years being angry in a productive direction. I told her I was coming back, and roughly when, and I asked how Dora was managing the new status documentation. Her reply came in 6 hours. Dora, she said, had already organized 3 other recently freed Selvath into an informal advisory group, and was currently consulting with the Implementation Council on the documentation structure. Lev had been promoted to Senior Household Coordinator. Priya had been appointed as a formal legal researcher to the Accords process, and was, Sarathval wrote, visibly pleased about this in the way of someone who was trying not to show how much it meant. Captain Voran, she added, had quietly revised the palace sensor calibration to incorporate human-range acoustic detection, citing operational security needs, and had not told anyone why. I sat with that information for a long moment and felt something warm. On the 9th day of the debrief, a representative from the United Earth Council asked me, formally, whether I would be willing to serve as Earth's first official liaison to the Kethvaran Compact. I thought about it. Not for long. Yes, I said, with conditions. The conditions were, Dora would be part of the liaison team, Priya would have official status as legal researcher, the liaison office would be located in the palace, and the appointment would be subject to review by Sareth Val as head of the Implementation Council. All 4 conditions were agreed to within the hour. I went home that evening. I sat with my mother and ate food that tasted exactly right, and watched the earth sky go from blue to gold to the particular deep dark of a night with no other sun. I told her some of what had happened, the parts that could be explained in order, and she listened with the expression of someone who is very glad that a person they love is present and real and talking, regardless of what the words say. After a while she said, "You are going back." "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "You were always going somewhere," she said. It was not a complaint. It was an observation, the kind that people who have known you for your entire life make about you, accurately and without judgment. Even before. "I think," I said, "that I am going somewhere that matters." She looked at me for a long moment. "Then go," she said. I testified before the United Earth Council on my last day before departure. A formal session. 100 representatives from the member nations. A room with windows looking out over a city that was building its future in the same way it built everything, with urgency and argument, and extraordinary amounts of energy directed in multiple directions simultaneously. I was asked to speak about the Accords, about the Compact, about what lay ahead. I spoke for 40 minutes. I covered the legal structure, the political landscape, the key relationships, the ongoing challenges, the realistic timelines. I was direct about what had been achieved, and direct about what had not. When I finished, there was a period of questions. Near the end of the session, a representative from a northern country asked me something that the others had been building toward without quite saying directly. She asked, "After what you have seen and experienced, how do you understand Earth's position in the galaxy?" I thought about the question honestly. I thought about the sand and the Veldrun. I thought about the arrow shaft and the broken fingers. I thought about Sarethval's voice in the cell doorway, and Dora's laugh through the wall. I thought about Nkosi saying one word in answer to a question about how many ships were coming. I thought about what it means to be a species that spent most of its history in vigorous disagreement with itself, that invented the technology to reach the stars as a side effect of trying to solve 1,000 other problems, that was told it was too primitive to matter, and responded by being quiet for 4 years and building. "We are a young species," I said. "By galactic standards, we are very young. The oldest compact member has been traveling the stars for 11,000 years. We have been at it for 40. We have made mistakes in those 40 years, and we will make more. We do not have the advantage of long experience." I paused. "What we have," I said, "is the particular quality of something that has not yet been shaped by long experience into an expected pattern. We are still capable of responding to a situation in ways that no one with more history would think to try. We are still capable of being surprising, and in a galaxy where everyone has been doing roughly the same things for roughly the same reasons for a very long time, being surprising is not a small thing." I looked at the window, at the sky beyond it. They watched us in an arena and thought, "How interesting." They watched us send one ship and thought, "How foolish." They watched us read a 400-year-old document and find a clause that changed everything, and thought, "How unexpected." I paused. We are not finished being unexpected. We have barely started. I left for Kethvara 4 days later. Dora's message arrived the day before departure. "Please bring the medical reference text on human musculoskeletal systems. Physician Arveth has requested it. He is apparently writing a paper." I brought the book. On the journey back, I sat in the observation room of the transport vessel and watched the stars, and I thought about what was waiting, Malthius's next move, the implementation work, the other compact member states that had not yet agreed to extend the Accord's protections. The 12 other species who had, in the weeks since the ratification, sent messages to Earth, not requests for rescue, requests for alliance. Messages that said, if you managed to do what you did, perhaps we should talk. I thought about what I had told the council. We are not finished being unexpected. The stars moved past the window, and I watched them, and I thought about sand that tasted like metal, and the shake in my arm that I had not let anyone see, and 4 years of choosing how to survive in a place built for my failure, and everything that choosing had led to. I thought about a princess who had pointed from an observation box at a man in the sand and decided to invoke a law 300 years old. I thought about how the thing that changes a galaxy is usually one small moment, one decision made in a fraction of a second, one arrow shaft in a left side nerve cluster, one word on a document that means something different than anyone expected. We are not finished being unexpected. Not by a long distance. Not yet.